Theranos was a privately owned company founded by Elizabeth Holmes in 2003 in Palo Alto, California. Mrs. Holmes wanted to revolutionize the industry of laboratory testing and, in her own words, change the world. The company managed to secure millions of dollars in funding during their 15 years of activity, but they never actually delivered anything that was commercially viable. And when it was forced to close down in 2018, all investor shares were worthless. So what happened, and how did it happen? Let's have a look at Theranos' story. Elizabeth Holmes came up with the business idea for Theranos in 2003 when she was 19 years old, during her first year at Stanford University, where she studied chemical engineering. Being afraid of needles herself, she wanted to find a way to revolutionize blood testing to make it more efficient, less expensive, less cumbersome, and ideally less scary for patients. She then started developing a technology that would automate and miniaturize about 1,000 lab tests, from routine blood tests to advanced genetic analysis. Not only that, the tests would only require a small sample of blood, usually taken by a tiny prick on the finger, and the results would be available within few hours or even minutes. Traditionally, in fact, blood tests require a specialized setup in a clinic or a hospital. Needles are used to take one or more vials of blood, and then the samples are sent by a courier to a laboratory, where they are manipulated to finally get a result after days or weeks. Theranos' technology promised to radically change all this. The tests would be done at a local pharmacy, or at a physician, or even at home, with the results available almost immediately. Testing would only cost a fraction of the current cost, with clear savings for patients and for Medicare and Medicaid. Mrs. Holmes claimed that in this way there would be an increase in the number of people tested, and also an increase in the frequency of tests, allowing a better diagnosis and identification of early signs of health problems. The blood testing market was estimated to be worth around $75 billion back then, and Mrs. Holmes was convinced that her technology could add $125 billion to it. This had the potential to be a multi-billion dollars idea. Like all the startups, the newly formed Theranos needed funding to finance its research. The initial money came from Mrs. Holmes' family. As she dropped out of Stanford to start her own business, she obtained permission from her parents to use the tuition fund they set aside. During 2004, she was introduced to various venture capitalists that in Silicon Valley are always eager to fund new disruptive technologies. By the end of the year, she was able to secure about $6 million in funding. This money allowed the company to survive during the years it was developing its revolutionary technology. Specifically, they were working on the Theranos Sample Processing Units, TSPUs, that would analyze the blood taken from a finger stick. By 2009, though, Theranos was running out of money, so Holmes turned to Ramesh Balwani, a software engineer she met back in 2002 while they were both attending Berkeley. Balwani agreed to guarantee a line of credit for the company and contextually joined Theranos as COO. By 2010, a new version of the TSPU was developed, one that could do additional tests. They called it the Mini Lab. At that point, they felt they were ready to start commercializing the technology. The first contracts were with Walgreens, US second largest pharmacy store chain, and Safeway, a big retailer that operates in 17 US states. The launch date of the test facilities built within the pharmacies and the retail stores was set for 2013. They called them Theranos Wellness Centers. On the strength of these agreements, Theranos could secure further $92 million funding by the end of 2010. This gave the company some breathing space. But by the end of 2013, Theranos was again in need of more money to continue developing its technology. This time Holmes knew she needed much more than the amount of money she was able to secure in the previous years, so she upped her game. From 2013 to 2015, Theranos was able to raise over $700 million. How was it possible? Very simply, Theranos and Mrs. Holmes emerged into the spotlight, securing media interviews and invites to various conferences that produced valuable marketing material used to convince potential investors. In those occasions, Mrs. Holmes touted far and wide Theranos' cutting-edge technology, namely that they could do 200 types of tests and were ramping up to offer more than 1,000. They could do them using one small blood sample taken from a prick on your finger, and that the results would be available within few hours. Not only that, she was also stating that the technology would allow them to achieve higher reliability of their tests with just 10% allowable error compared to the 30% of the traditional technology. Potential investors and journalists were also invited to the company premises for presentations and practical demonstrations with actual blood samples being taken and tested. During those presentations, the estimated revenue growth was also given based on the contracts signed with Walgreens and Safeway and the projected future evolution of those contracts. Investors were told that Theranos' 2014 revenues were about $100 million, and they were on track to reach $1 billion by 2016. Mrs. Holmes sounded and looked convincing to everyone. During 2014, in fact, she appeared on the covers of notorious business magazines like Fortune, Forbes, and Inc. She was also recognized by Forbes as the youngest self-made billionaire, and they ranked her number 100 in the Forbes 400. Theranos at that point was valued around $9 billion. Mrs. Holmes' personal wealth estimated around $4.5 billion, in virtue of her 50% stake in the company. So what went wrong? Elizabeth Holmes lied, nothing more, nothing less. She firmly believed in her company and in the capabilities of her engineers to deliver what she was promising to investors and clients, but that never became true. The initial TSPUs were only capable of doing 12 types of tests, and the later versions, the mini-labs, had various technical problems and were never commercially ready. This meant that of all the hundreds of blood tests that we were offering, a few were done on the initial versions of the TSPUs, whilst mini-labs were never used. The remaining tests were done using either other vendors' devices modified to receive the finger prick samples, or using outright unmodified third-party devices. In some cases, the samples were even sent out to external laboratories, but all this was a company secret. Never investors or clients were told about this. On the contrary, they were led to believe that Theranos technology was working as intended. Mrs. Holmes, as well as Mr. Balwani, in various occasions firmly denied any rumors related to possible problems with their devices. The demonstrations offered to journalists and potential investors at their premises were a charade. Once the blood sample was taken, it was then analyzed using third-party machines, not using their technology. But the lab was set up in a way to trick the audience to think that what they were seeing was all Theranos technology at work. Mrs. Holmes also lied about Walgreens and Safeway contracts. They were indeed signed, but they never reached full implementation. Specifically, during 2014, she was given the idea that the rollout of Theranos services through Walgreens was going well, with the prospect of adding 800 to 900 more wellness centers by the end of 2015. This wasn't true. The rollout stalled in 2014 because Walgreens executives had concerns about Theranos' performance. Similarly, Mrs. Holmes was telling investors that her company's services would be rolled out in additional 100 Safeway stores by 2015. In reality, the relationship with the retailer stalled back in 2013. Even the reported revenues were a lie. Not only the $1 billion projected revenues were just a pure fantasy, knowing what was going on with Walgreens and Safeway behind the scenes, but also the stated 2014 revenues of $100 million were non-existent. During that year, Theranos was barely making $100,000, and yet they were boasting millions of revenues coming from various lines of business that never actually generated a penny. As it always happens with lies, reality finally catches up and it all falls down. In early 2015, two professors wrote two separate articles casting doubts on Theranos. In one article, Professor Ioannidis questioned the fact that the company had never published any peer-reviewed research, and in the other, Professor Diamandis analyzed Theranos technology and he concluded it was exaggerated. Later the same year, Wall Street Journal journalist John Carreyrou reported that Theranos was using normal devices to run the blood tests, and that the tests coming from their own devices provided inaccurate results. Despite Mrs. Holmes denying everything and promising to publish data to counter those claims, the tide was starting to turn. Following the report from the Wall Street Journal, Walgreens suspended their plans to expand blood testing centers in their stores. In early 2016, thanks to a whistleblower, the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services started an inspection of the Newark laboratory in California, uncovering irregularities with staff proficiency, procedures, and equipment. As a consequence, Mrs. Holmes was banned to own, operate, or directing a blood testing service for 2 years. Also, the inspection forced Theranos to void all the blood tests they conducted on their own devices in the previous 2 years. This announcement prompted Walgreens to terminate their agreement with the company. In 2016, the ACC and the federal prosecutors launched an investigation into Theranos for misleading investors and government officials about its technology. At this point, the company was in freefall. In October 2016, they announced the closure of their laboratories and a 40% cut of their 850 workers. Then, soon after, in January 2017, a further 41% workforce cut was announced. Lawsuits followed very quickly. Walgreens sued for breach of the contract and reached a settlement for around $30 million. Two investment funds that invested in the company sued for misleading the company directors, and it was settled for an undisclosed amount. Theranos also settled with Arizona Attorney General over violation of the Arizona Consumer Act for false advertisement and inaccurate blood testing. The company agreed to pay a total amount of $4.65 million to the state residents that had taken a blood test with them. Despite all this, in early 2018 the company was still operating with just 25 remaining employees trying to develop its technology, but it was on the verge of bankruptcy. And in fact, on September 4, 2018, the company announced it would completely cease its operations. Inevitably, also personal lawsuits were filed against Mrs. Holmes and Mr. Balwani. In June 2018, they were both indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Mrs. Holmes was found guilty in January 2022, while Mr. Balwani was found guilty in July 2022. The sentences should be released this coming October. They both face up to $250,000 in penalties and 20 years in prison. Theranos, the company that would revolutionize the blood testing and change the world. In the end, it was just a sham. It is no surprise that of all places, the company was founded and thrived in Silicon Valley. Theranos defined itself, in fact, as a technology company, not a healthcare company. And like many tech companies, Theranos promised a disrupting, world-changing technology that would be delivered only years later. Theranos technology is so cutting-edge that no one would understand it, so Mrs. Holmes was defending the company when the first criticism started to rise. Thanks to her charismatic character and Walter Hare's persona, Elizabeth Holmes created the hype and the fear of missing out on her appealing idea that had a multi-billion-dollar potential. In the end, though, her personal ambition and overwhelming thirst for power and recognition did not allow her to see that it wasn't working. She truly believed that her idea was achievable, that it would be such a positive change for the world, that when it would have been finally revealed, all the lies that she told to get there would be forgiven and forgotten. P.T. Barnum once said, "Put on the appearance of a business, and generally the reality will follow." Mrs. Holmes got the first part right, but reality didn't actually follow. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a comment, like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you.